My name is Donna, and at 54, I thought I knew what unconditional love meant. I had spent decades pouring my heart into raising my son Jake after his father passed away when he was just 12. When Jake announced his engagement to Amanda, I was overjoyed. Finally, my boy was building his own family. I had been planning something special for months, something that would show him just how much his happiness meant to me. I had sacrificed so much to give him the perfect start to married life, but nothing could have prepared me for his reaction when I presented my gift. The way he looked at me that day, the words he spoke, they shattered something inside me that I didn't even know could break. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Trust me, you'll want to hear how love can sometimes teach the hardest lessons. Let me tell you what happened when love met greed. Looking back, I realize the warning signs were always there, but love has a way of making you blind to the truth. After my husband David died in that car accident, everything changed overnight. Jake was just starting middle school, that awkward age where boys need their fathers most. I remember those first months, how lost we both felt. The life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses, and suddenly, I was a single mother with a mortgage and a grieving child. I took on 2 jobs just to keep us afloat. During the day, I worked as a receptionist at a dental office, and 3 nights a week, I cleaned offices downtown. Jake would do his homework at the dental clinic while I finished up paperwork. Those were hard times, but they brought us closer together. Jake would help me prepare dinner when we got home, and we'd talk about everything. His day at school, his dreams, his fears about growing up without his dad. He was such a thoughtful boy back then. On my birthday, when he was 15, he used his lawn mowing money to buy me a small potted orchid because he remembered me admiring them at the grocery store. He promised me that when he grew up and became successful, he'd take care of me the way I had taken care of him. Those words meant everything to me during the lonely nights when I wondered if I was doing enough. Jake excelled in school and earned a scholarship to study marketing at the state university. I was so proud watching him graduate, knowing that despite all our struggles, he had made something of himself. He landed a good job at a marketing firm in the city, making more money in his first year than I had ever seen. He moved into a nice apartment and would visit me every other weekend, bringing groceries and staying for dinner. Everything changed when he met Amanda at a company networking event 2 years ago. She came from money, old family wealth that showed in the way she carried herself. The designer clothes she wore so casually, the expensive car she drove like it was nothing special. At first, Jake seemed nervous about introducing her to me, and I understood why when I finally met her. She was polite but distant, the kind of politeness that keeps you at arm's length while maintaining social graces. I noticed changes in Jake almost immediately. He started making comments about our old neighborhood, calling it rough around the edges. He stopped bringing Amanda over for dinner, always having some excuse about being too busy. When I suggested meeting at restaurants, he'd choose places far from where I lived, expensive spots where I felt out of place in my department store clothes. Amanda would smile tightly when I spoke, checking her phone frequently, making it clear she'd rather be anywhere else. The final wake-up call came last Christmas, when Jake suggested we meet at a hotel restaurant instead of celebrating at home like we always had. When I asked why, he mumbled something about Amanda being uncomfortable with certain environments. That night, I cried myself to sleep, realizing my son was ashamed of the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. But despite the growing distance, despite the way he seemed to be pulling away from our shared history, I still believed that underneath it all was the boy who had promised to take care of me. When he announced his engagement, I saw it as an opportunity to bridge the gap that had grown between us, to show him that I wasn't just his past. I could be part of his future too. The idea came to me during one of those sleepless nights when I couldn't stop thinking about Jake's upcoming wedding. I wanted to give him something meaningful, something that would help him and Amanda start their new life together. Not just another wedding gift that would sit on a shelf, but something substantial that showed how much I believed in their future. I had been watching the real estate market for months, secretly hoping to understand the world Jake now moved in. I noticed a small studio apartment for sale just 15 minutes from his office in a safe, up-and-coming neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, well-maintained, and perfect for a young couple starting out. The asking price was $35,000, more money than I had ever spent on anything besides our family home. The plan started forming slowly. I could use my savings, sell my old Honda that I'd been driving for 8 years, and maybe take out a small personal loan. It would be tight, but I could make it work. The idea of giving Jake and Amanda their own place somewhere they could build memories without rent payments hanging over their heads filled me with such joy that I couldn't sleep. I started working extra shifts at the hospital, taking on weekend cleaning jobs for wealthy families in Amanda's neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was cleaning the homes of people like her future in-laws to afford a gift for their wedding, but every extra dollar went into my apartment fund. I cut every possible expense eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, walking to work when weather permitted, canceling my cable subscription. Learning about real estate was like studying a foreign language. I spent hours at the library reading about property investments, mortgage rates, and legal requirements. The realtor, Mrs. Chen, was patient with my endless questions. She probably wondered why a woman in her 50s was suddenly interested in buying investment property. But she never made me feel stupid for not knowing the terminology. The day I toured the apartment, I could picture Jake and Amanda there perfectly. The morning sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the hardwood floors. The kitchen was small, but efficient with updated appliances and granite countertops. I imagined Amanda cooking dinner while Jake worked at the breakfast bar, both of them building a life together in this space I would provide. The paperwork process was overwhelming. Terms like title search, escrow, and deed transfer swirled in my head as I signed document after document. I had to take a day off work to meet with the lawyer, losing wages I couldn't really afford to lose, but it was worth it for the look I imagined on Jake's face when he realized what I had done for him. I spent weeks preparing the presentation. I found a beautiful wooden box at an antique store and lined it with velvet fabric. Inside, I placed the deed, the keys, and a handwritten letter explaining how much his happiness meant to me. I wrote about the apartment's features, the neighborhood's potential for growth, and how proud I was to help him start this new chapter of his life. The letter took me 3 attempts to get right. I wanted to strike the perfect tone, loving, but not overly emotional, helpful, but not interfering. I mentioned specific details about the apartment's location near his office, the good school district for future grandchildren, the small garden space where Amanda could grow herbs if she wanted. Every word was chosen carefully to show that this gift came from a place of love and hope for their future together. Standing in my living room the night before, I planned to give them the gift, holding that wooden box in my hands. I felt such overwhelming love and anticipation. This was it. This was how I would show Jake that despite our recent distance, despite Amanda's apparent discomfort with me, I wanted nothing more than their happiness and success. The morning I chose to give Jake his gift, I woke up before dawn, unable to contain my excitement and nervousness. I had called ahead to make sure both he and Amanda would be home, telling him I had something special for them before the wedding chaos really kicked into high gear. Jake sounded distracted on the phone, but agreed to see me around 10 in the morning. I spent extra time getting ready, choosing my best dress, and the small pearl earrings David had given me for our anniversary years ago. I wanted to look my best for this moment to show Jake and Amanda that I understood the significance of what I was doing. The wooden box sat on my passenger seat during the drive to their house, and I kept glancing at it, my heart racing with anticipation. Their house was in one of those new developments where every lawn looked professionally maintained, and every driveway held cars that cost more than I made in a year. As I walked up the stone pathway to their front door, I felt that familiar flutter of nervousness I always experienced in Amanda's world. But today was different. Today, I belonged here because I was bringing them something that would change their lives. Jake answered the door, wearing a casual button-down and khakis, looking every inch the successful young professional he had become. Amanda was curled up on their cream-colored sofa in an outfit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, scrolling through her phone with manicured nails. She looked up when I entered, but didn't get up to greet me, offering only a brief smile before returning to her screen. The living room was exactly what I expected. Modern furniture in neutral tones, abstract art on the walls, everything coordinated and expensive-looking. I felt suddenly self-conscious about my wooden box, wondering if it looked cheap against their sophisticated backdrop. But I pushed those thoughts away, focusing on the joy I was about to bring them. Jake offered me coffee, which I accepted gratefully, using the few minutes he spent in the kitchen to gather my courage. When he returned, Amanda finally put down her phone and looked at me expectantly, as if waiting for me to explain why I was disrupting their Saturday morning. "I wanted to give you both something special before things get too hectic with wedding preparations." I began, my voice slightly shaky with emotion. I placed the wooden box on their glass coffee table, and both of them stared at it with curiosity. Jake reached for it first, lifting the lid carefully. I watched his face as he processed what he was seeing. The deed with both their names, the keys on a small silver ring, the letter I had written with such care. His expression shifted from curiosity to confusion to something I couldn't quite identify. Amanda leaned over to look, her perfectly shaped eyebrows furrowing as she read the property address. "A studio apartment." Jake's voice was flat, emotionless. "In Riverside." He said the neighborhood name like it left a bad taste in his mouth. Amanda wrinkled her nose as if she had smelled something unpleasant. "It's a wonderful neighborhood," I said quickly, my excitement dimming slightly at their reactions. "The property values are going up, and it's so close to your office, Jake. I thought you could live there together, save money on rent, maybe even rent it out later as an investment." Jake picked up the deed and stared at it for what felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, he stood up and walked across the room to their kitchen trash can. I watched in horror as he dropped the entire contents of the box, the deed, the keys, my carefully written letter, into the garbage. "Mom, what were you thinking?" His voice was cold, disappointed. "This place is in one of the worst parts of town. Amanda and I could never live somewhere like that. Look at this house. Look at the neighborhood we've chosen. Did you really think we'd want to downgrade to some tiny apartment in Riverside?" Amanda finally spoke up, her voice dripping with disdain. "Donna, I appreciate the gesture, but we have standards. I can't imagine what our friends would think if they knew we were living in that area. The schools alone are completely unacceptable for our future children." The words hit me like physical blows. I felt my face flush with embarrassment and hurt, but Jake wasn't finished. He walked back over to me, his expression harder than I had ever seen it. "You know what would actually be helpful, Mom Cash? Amanda and I are planning a honeymoon in Europe that's going to cost $55,000. If you really want to contribute to our happiness, that's what we need. Real money for real experiences, not some rundown apartment in a neighborhood we'd never be caught dead in." He handed me a printed itinerary. Luxury hotels in Paris, first-class flights, exclusive tours through Italy and Spain. The numbers at the bottom made my head spin. $55,000. More money than I had ever seen in one place, more than I made in an entire year. "You owe me this much at least." Jake continued, his voice growing more demanding. "After everything you've put me through growing up, the embarrassment of our old neighborhood, the way you've never really understood what I need to succeed in my career. This honeymoon is important for my relationship with Amanda's family. They expect a certain level of sophistication." I sat there in stunned silence, feeling like the room was spinning around me. This was my son, the boy I had raised, the child I had sacrificed everything for. He was standing there telling me I owed him $55,000 for a vacation, while my heartfelt gift sat in his trash can like worthless garbage. Amanda nodded approvingly at Jake's words, adding, "We really do need this honeymoon, Donna. Jake's career depends on maintaining certain relationships, and my father's business associates will be asking about our trip. We can't tell them we stayed home because of financial constraints." I looked between my son and his fiancée, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. The entitlement, the complete lack of gratitude, the way they spoke about my gift, as if it were an insult rather than an expression of love. Something inside me shifted, a door closing that I hadn't even realized was open. Without saying a word, I stood up, walked to their trash can, and retrieved my letter. Jake and Amanda watched me in silence as I folded it carefully and put it in my purse. Then I walked to their front door, my legs feeling shaky, but my resolve growing stronger with each step. "Mom, where are you going?" Jake called after me. "We need to talk about the honeymoon money. When can you have it ready?" I turned to look at him one last time, this stranger who shared my DNA, but none of my values. "Goodbye, Jake," I said quietly, and walked out of his house, leaving behind more than just a gift that day. The drive home passed in a blur of tears and disbelief. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, hoping I had misunderstood something, hoping that Jake would call to apologize and explain that he was just stressed about the wedding. But as I sat in my small living room, staring at the crumpled letter I had rescued from his trash, I knew there was no misunderstanding what had happened. My phone started ringing that evening. Jake's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment my heart leaped with hope that he was calling to make things right. Instead, his voice was businesslike, impatient. "Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation today. I know the apartment thing didn't work out, but we still need to discuss the honeymoon funding. Amanda and I have been looking at the timeline and will need the money within the next 3 weeks to make all the arrangements." I listened in amazement as he continued outlining his expectations, as if what had happened earlier was a minor inconvenience rather than a devastating betrayal. He talked about payment schedules, wire transfer procedures, and the importance of getting the first-class flights booked before prices went up. Not once did he acknowledge how his words had hurt me. Not once did he mention the gift I had worked so hard to give him. When he finally paused, waiting for my response, I found myself speaking words I had never planned to say. "I won't be attending your wedding, Jake." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Jake's voice exploded through the phone. "What do you mean you won't be attending? You're my mother. You have to be there." "No," I said quietly, surprised by how calm I sounded. "I don't have to be anywhere. I'm not wanted or respected." "Have a lovely wedding, Jake. I hope you and Amanda find all the happiness you're looking for." I hung up the phone before he could respond, then immediately turned it off. For the first time in months, my house felt peaceful. Over the next few days, Jake called repeatedly. I could see his messages piling up on my voicemail, but I didn't listen to them. I could guess their content: demands for the money, anger about my wedding decision, possibly some manipulation disguised as emotional appeals. I wasn't ready to hear any of it. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I focused on myself. I called Mrs. Patterson, the real estate agent who had helped me buy the apartment, and explained that I needed to sell it immediately. She was surprised, but professional, promising to list it right away. The market was good, she assured me, and studios in that area were in demand among young professionals who actually appreciated affordable housing near downtown. During those quiet days, I made other changes too. I called my lawyer, Mr. Williams, and scheduled an appointment to update my will. Jake had been my primary beneficiary since his father's death, but something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. I wasn't acting out of spite. I was acting out of clarity. The most significant change was the decision I made about the money from the apartment sale. Instead of letting it sit in my savings account growing older, along with my resentment, I researched local charities that help children in foster care. These were kids who understood what it meant to have nothing, who would appreciate opportunities rather than demanding them as birthrights. I found a wonderful organization called Hope House that provided college scholarships for foster children aging out of the system. The director, Maria Santos, met with me personally to explain how scholarship funds were distributed. These young people worked part-time jobs, while maintaining good grades, wrote essays about their dreams, and never took their opportunities for granted. As I signed the paperwork to establish the scholarship fund with the $35,000 from the apartment sale, plus additional money from my savings, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. This money would help deserving children build better futures, children who understood the value of hard work and gratitude. The scholarship would be called the David Memorial Fund, named after my late husband, who had believed that education was the path to a better life. Jake would probably never know about it, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that something beautiful would come from all the pain and disappointment. I also made the difficult decision to change my phone number. The constant calls and messages from Jake had become harassment, and I needed space to think clearly about what kind of relationship, if any, we might have in the future. I left my new number with only a few people: my doctor, my employer, and Mrs. Patterson, in case there were any issues with the apartment sale. For the first time since David's death, I felt like I was living for myself, rather than just surviving for someone else. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time, this realization that I had worth beyond what I could provide for my ungrateful son. 3 weeks after our confrontation, Jake's wedding day arrived with all the pomp and circumstance he and Amanda had planned. I spent that Saturday volunteering at Hope House, helping kids with their college application essays, instead of watching my son marry a woman who had taught him to be ashamed of where he came from. Through mutual friends, I heard pieces of what happened at the ceremony. Jake had borrowed heavily to fund the elaborate celebration, a venue that cost $20,000, flowers that cost more than most people's cars, a 7-course dinner for 200 guests. Everything was designed to impress Amanda's wealthy family and Jake's professional contacts. I later learned that Jake had spent the entire ceremony looking toward the entrance, expecting me to change my mind and appear at the last moment with the check he felt entitled to. When I didn't materialize, he became increasingly agitated throughout the evening. Several guests mentioned his distracted behavior, how he kept checking his phone, and seemed unable to focus on his new wife. The real drama began during the reception, when Amanda's father cornered Jake about the honeymoon plans. Mr. Richardson had been bragging to his business associates about his new son-in-law's European adventure, promising to share photos from their exclusive resorts. When Jake had to admit that some aspects of the trip might need to be modified due to last-minute complications, Amanda's family was not pleased. Amanda herself became increasingly demanding as the reality of their financial situation set in. The credit cards Jake had used to fund the wedding were maxed out, and the honeymoon he had promised her was suddenly in jeopardy. She had already posted on social media about their upcoming luxury vacation, and the thought of having to explain a scaled-back trip to her friends was mortifying. The night after the wedding, Jake's calls to my old number resumed with desperate intensity. When he realized I had changed my number, he tried reaching me through my workplace. My supervisor, Mrs. Kelly, was kind enough to take a message, but warned me that Jake had sounded extremely agitated and demanded my new contact information. I asked Mrs. Kelly to tell him that if he wanted to communicate with me, he could write a letter. Old-fashioned, perhaps, but I needed time to process any communication from him without the pressure of immediate response that phone calls demanded. The letter arrived 4 days after the wedding, and it was everything I expected. No apology, no acknowledgement of how he had treated me. Instead, it was a detailed explanation of his financial crisis and a demand that I stop this childish behavior and provide the money he needed immediately. He wrote about how embarrassed he was in front of Amanda's family, how his career could be damaged by his inability to maintain the lifestyle expected in his social circle. He mentioned the possibility of having to cancel the honeymoon entirely, painting this as a catastrophe that would somehow be my fault for abandoning him during his time of need. The most revealing part of the letter was his complete inability to understand why I was upset. He seemed genuinely confused by my reaction to his treatment of my gift, describing it as a practical response to an impractical gesture. He wrote that he thought I would appreciate his honesty rather than fake gratitude for something he couldn't use. Reading between the lines, I could see that his marriage was already under strain. Amanda had apparently made several cutting remarks about his cash flow problems and had begun questioning whether Jake was really the successful professional she thought she was marrying. The pressure to prove his worth through expensive gestures was crushing him, but he still couldn't see that the solution wasn't more money. It was different values. I wrote back once a brief note that said, "Jake, I love you, but I will not fund a lifestyle built on ingratitude and entitlement. When you're ready to have a real conversation about respect and family, I'll be here. Until then, please don't contact me." I mailed it to his office, not wanting Amanda to intercept it at home. The silence that followed was both heartbreaking and peaceful. I threw myself into my work at Hope House, where I had started volunteering every weekend. These kids, some not much younger than Jake when his father died, taught me daily lessons about resilience and appreciation. They said thank you for small kindnesses and worked hard for every opportunity, never taking anything for granted. Maria Santos, the director, became a good friend during this period. She understood family disappointment, having dealt with her own challenging relationships. Over coffee one Saturday, she said something that stayed with me. Sometimes, the most loving thing we can do is refuse to enable someone's worst behavior. It's not about punishment, it's about creating space for growth. Summer passed into fall, and I heard nothing from Jake for 3 months. Then on a rainy November afternoon, he appeared at my door looking like a man who had aged years in a matter of months. Gone was the confident, well-dressed professional I had last seen. Instead, he stood on my porch in a wrinkled shirt and jeans, his hair unkempt, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. "Mom," he said simply, and something in his voice was different. The entitlement was gone, replaced by a vulnerability I hadn't heard since he was a child. I invited him in, offering coffee out of habit, and we sat at my kitchen table where we had shared so many conversations during his teenage years. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Jake stared at his hands while I studied this stranger who looked like my son. "Amanda left me," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Last week. She said she couldn't handle being married to someone who was financially unreliable and socially embarrassing." He laughed bitterly. Those were her exact words. I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for his pain, relief that the toxic influence of Amanda was out of his life. But I didn't say anything, sensing he needed to continue talking. The wedding debt was crushing us. The credit card payments alone were eating up most of my salary. We never went on the honeymoon. We couldn't afford it after all the wedding expenses. Amanda was furious about that, especially when her friends started posting photos from their own trips. She said I had humiliated her in front of her family. Jake rubbed his face with both hands, looking older than his 28 years. She moved back in with her parents, and her father made sure I understood that their family wanted nothing more to do with me. Apparently, I was not the caliber of person they expected their daughter to marry. The irony wasn't lost on me. Amanda's family had judged Jake the same way Jake and Amanda had judged my neighborhood and my gift. But I still stayed quiet, letting him process his own thoughts. "I lost the house too," he continued. "Without Amanda's income, I couldn't make the mortgage payments on top of the wedding debt. I'm living in a 1-bedroom apartment now, the kind of place you probably thought I'd appreciate more." His voice cracked on those last words. That's when I saw something I hadn't seen in years, genuine remorse in my son's eyes. "Mom, I need to tell you something. After Amanda left, I went through our old photo albums, the ones you kept from when I was growing up. I saw pictures of you working those late nights, coming home exhausted, but still helping me with homework. I remembered how you used to save up for months just to buy my school supplies." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. My letter from the wooden box, the one I had rescued from his trash. "I kept this," he said. "I don't know why, but I kept it. I read it again last night, really read it, and I realized what you were trying to give me wasn't just an apartment. You were trying to give me a foundation, a place to build something real. Tears started running down his cheeks, and I felt my own eyes filling up. I threw away the deed, Mom. I threw away your love like it was garbage because it wasn't expensive enough for Amanda's standards. And then I had the nerve to demand money from you like you owed me something. I reached across the table and took his hand, feeling how thin he had become. Jake, what happened to us? When did we stop being a family? I think it happened when I started measuring everything by Amanda's standards instead of the values you taught me, he said. When I became ashamed of where I came from, instead of proud of how far we'd traveled together. When I forgot that the woman who cleaned offices at night so I could have school clothes was the same woman offering to buy me an apartment. We talked for hours that day, really talked for the first time in years. Jake told me about the pressure he had felt to fit into Amanda's world, how he had convinced himself that rejecting our past was necessary for his future success. He described the loneliness of trying to maintain an image he couldn't afford, surrounded by people who valued him only for what he could provide. I shared my own journey over the past months. The volunteer work at Hope House, the scholarship fund I had created, the peace I had found in living authentically, instead of constantly trying to prove my worth through what I could give others. When I told him about the David Memorial Fund, Jake cried harder than he had since his father's funeral. Dad would have been so disappointed in me, he whispered. Your father would have been proud of the man you're becoming right now, I corrected him. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, and even more courage to change direction. But I also needed to be honest with him about boundaries. Jake, I love you, and I want to rebuild our relationship. But things can't go back to the way they were before. I won't be your financial safety net anymore, and I won't accept being treated as less than worthy of respect. He nodded, understanding. I don't want your money anymore, Mom. I want my mother back. I want to be the son you raised me to be, not the person I became, trying to impress people who never really cared about me. That conversation was the beginning of a long healing process. Jake moved into a modest apartment he could afford on his own income. He started attending financial counseling to deal with the wedding debt responsibly. Most importantly, he began volunteering at Hope House with me on weekends, working with kids who reminded him what real gratitude looked like. It's been 2 years since that November day when Jake appeared at my door broken but ready to rebuild. The journey hasn't been easy. Healing relationships never are. But it's been worth every difficult conversation, every moment of uncertainty, every small step forward. Jake paid off his wedding debt slowly but completely, working extra freelance projects and living within his means for the first time since college. He learned to cook simple meals, shop at thrift stores, and find joy in experiences that didn't cost a fortune. Watching him discover contentment in simplicity reminded me of the boy he used to be before external expectations clouded his judgment. The work at Hope House transformed both of us in ways I never expected. Jake developed a mentoring relationship with Marcus, a 17-year-old aging out of foster care who dreams of becoming an engineer. Watching Jake help Marcus with college applications, sharing stories about overcoming adversity, and staying focused on goals, I saw glimpses of the man his father would have wanted him to become. Maria Santos often comments on how Jake's presence has enriched the program. He understands what it's like to lose your way and find it again, she told me recently. These kids need to see that success isn't about what you own, it's about who you choose to be. The David Memorial Scholarship has helped 8 young people attend college so far. Each recipient writes thank you letters that remind me why redirecting that apartment money was the right choice. These kids work part-time jobs while maintaining honor roll grades, send updates about their studies, and express gratitude for opportunities they never take for granted. Jake and I have developed new traditions that honor our relationship without the financial pressure that once defined it. We volunteer together every Saturday morning, then have lunch at a small diner near Hope House, where we talk about everything. His job challenges my retirement planning memories of his father, dreams for the future. He's dating someone new now, a social worker named Rachel, who shares his renewed values about community service and authentic living. Rachel treats me with genuine warmth, asks about my volunteer work, and seems to appreciate Jake for who he is rather than what he can provide. When they announced their engagement last month, my heart filled with joy instead of anxiety. Their wedding will be small, focused on family and close friends rather than impressing social circles. Jake asked if I would help with the planning, and we've chosen simple flowers, home-cooked food, and a ceremony in the community center where he volunteers. Rachel suggested including the Hope House kids in the celebration, wanting them to feel part of our extended family. The most healing moment came when Jake presented me with a small wrapped box on Mother's Day. Inside was a simple silver bracelet engraved with the words, "Thank you for teaching me that love isn't measured in dollars." He had saved for months to buy it, working odd jobs on weekends, determined to give me something meaningful rather than expensive. "I wanted to prove to myself that I could give you a gift the way you gave me that apartment," he said, "with love, sacrifice, and hope for the future. I understand now what you were really offering me that day, and I'm sorry it took me so long to appreciate it." We both cried that afternoon, not tears of sadness, but tears of restoration. The relationship we have now is stronger than what we had before, because it's built on mutual respect, rather than obligation, on chosen connection, rather than assumed entitlement. I've learned that sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is allowing them to face the consequences of their choices. Love doesn't mean enabling selfishness. It means having the courage to step back and let them grow. My silence after Jake's betrayal wasn't punishment. It was creating space for him to discover who he wanted to be without my constant rescue. The money I spent on that apartment, the money Jake demanded for his honeymoon, the money that once seemed so important, none of it mattered as much as the values we chose to embrace. Financial security is important, but character is invaluable. Respect can't be purchased, and gratitude can't be demanded. Jake recently told me he started a savings account for his future children's education, determined to teach them the lessons he had to learn the hard way. "I want them to understand the difference between what they want and what they need," he said. "And I want them to know their grandmother as the woman who loved her family enough to expect their best behavior." As I watch him building this new life with Rachel, volunteering with kids who remind him daily about resilience and gratitude, I feel proud of the man he's becoming. Not because of his career success or material possessions, but because of his kindness, his integrity, and his commitment to being better than his worst moments. The lessons of that painful year have stayed with both of us. Jake learned that real relationships can't survive on a foundation of entitlement and materialism. I learned that my worth isn't measured by what I can give, but by how I choose to receive respect. And sometimes, silence speaks louder than 1,000 words. I've come to understand that the apartment I tried to give Jake wasn't really about real estate. It was about Root's foundation and the belief that love should create security rather than demand it. When he threw away that deed, he threw away more than property. He threw away the values that had shaped our family. But here's what I know now that I didn't know. Then some gifts can only be received when the recipient is ready to understand their true value. Jake wasn't ready for what I was offering that day, but he is now. The foundation I wanted to give him through that apartment he's building for himself, through his choices, his relationships, and his commitment to becoming a man who honors rather than exploits the love he receives. The road back wasn't easy, but it led us to something more authentic than what we had before. Our relationship now is based on who we are, rather than what we can do for each other. And that's made all the difference. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice to step back from someone you love for their own good? How do you balance supporting family with maintaining your own boundaries? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about family resilience and the power of standing up for what's right. Share this with someone who might need to hear that love sometimes requires saying no. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth isn't determined by what you can give others, but by the respect you choose to accept. Wishing you all the strength to love wisely and the courage to expect the love you deserve.